money made on war. 5, 6, 7, 8. Stop the killing, stop the hate.
The 99%ers have been using a peaceful campaign of attrition to keep up the pressure on the 1%. Tax Day and Earth Day were among many actions coast to coast. Small protests, street theater, and gatherings have greeted America in anticipation of major actions planned for the month of May through to July. OWS Week has been following up the action and has found time to prepare a report on the tragic fate of the BP Gulf of Mexico oil spill whistleblowers. We're unstoppable because another world is possible.
Once upon a time, small groups of patriots roamed the land, assembled in public places to create community based on liberty and justice, stood against brutal authority, and slept on the ground. Meeting and organizing, calling on fellow citizens to join them. No 18th century fable here. We're talking about now. April 17th was tax day in the U.S., when 99%ers pay their federal income taxes, while corporations and banks glide above on tax breaks and subsidies. Occupy Tax Day actions highlighting military spending took place across the country. In New York City, a coalition of OWS, unions, and war resistors marched against tax inequity and war expense.
You pay yours at the new home.
Occupy DC took action against several corporations. In Oakland, California, occupiers joined 2 postal unions outside the main post office to inform the public about the fraudulent attack on the U.S. Postal Service and its workers. A rally was held to raise awareness of disastrous plans to slash 200,000 jobs, delay the mail, and close 3,700 post offices. A backdoor attempt to privatize the service and further isolate poor and rural communities. And Chicago's protesters continued their efforts on behalf of mental health clients at the Woodlawn Clinic, one of 6 slated to be closed at the end of April.
Occupy, that means we occupied and sat in the center to about 1 o'clock Friday morning.
You're talking about inside the mental health center?
Locked inside. Chains, locks, bars, anything we can get up to put so the police couldn't get in. Myself, I wasn't arrested. It was ladies and men and people 79 to 76 years old being arrested.
The next day, the arrestees, of whom there were 23, as well as many supporters, returned here to Woodlawn. And here they've stayed, sleeping in tents when they've been able, sleeping on top of their cars when the police say that camping is not allowed. And they plan to stay here and occupy this space until the clinics in Chicago are opened again.
Occupy Chicago consistently reaches out to support area groups in social and economic justice actions.
Occupy Chicago believes in occupation not just as a movement, but as a successful direct action tactic. Here at Woodlawn, we're supporting the patients of the clinic who are fighting against closures of mental health clinics all over the city of Chicago. They did a massive letter writing campaign. They got thousands of signatures on petitions. They did protests in the streets. They did a sit-in at the mayor's office, and still Mayor Emanuel refused to listen to their demands. So, as a last resort, they occupied the inside of the Woodlawn Clinic, locking themselves down and saying that they would be prepared to stay for up to a month to make sure that the clinics in Chicago were not closed.
Organizers point out that targeted clinics are in areas due for gentrification and that closing the clinics makes way for development on behalf of moneyed interests. Begging the question, what about the people?
This May in Chicago, there will be a slew of events leading up to the NATO summit at McCormick Place. There are a number of different groups organizing for the summits. Some of the biggest days of action will include May 18th, when National Nurses United will be leading a march through the streets of Chicago, calling for a Robin Hood tax on the wealthiest Americans. On the 20th, the Coalition Against the NATO and G8 War and Poverty Agenda, or CANGate, will be leading a march starting at noon at the Petrillo Bandshell, going to the gates of NATO, calling for an end to the NATO war machine. And in the morning, on May 20th, Iraq Veterans Against War will mass in the streets of Chicago with veterans from all over the country, will march on the NATO generals and return their medals in protest of this illegal war.
Earth Day was Sunday, April 22nd, and celebrated one way or another all over the globe. Occupy locations put on several rallies, actions, and events in the week preceding.
You are standing at the new home.
Occupy DC was all over the place and in the face of big lobbyist corporations and banks who pollute the planet and roll over many species in their way. Department of Homeland Security and Secret Service forces dropped heavy hand on intrepid protesters in displays of brute forces given free rein by H.R. 347.
I was a nature and landscape artist, so the BP underwater resonates deeply in my soul. I've done paintings of birds, plenty of birds, and when I was playing online for the internet trying to come up with an idea, one of the things that really just punched me right in the face were all those birds soaked in oil. And it inspired this oil rig.
My concern with Monsanto is that it is responsible for genetically modified food in this country, and many Americans are not aware that they're eating contaminated food. We are here today here is Washington, D.C. It is Thursday, April 18th, 2012. And we're here today at the Convention Center to make Americans aware of the food that they're eating. And we would like GMO food labeled so that consumers have the choice of whether or not they want to eat chemical food or organic food.
But peaceful actions commemorating the BP Gulf disaster and protests against tar sands, Monsanto, and the World Bank made their mark.
To make a future impossible for humanity! To make a future impossible for humanity!
Supposedly, the United States government has been trying to phase out dioxin from our food system for more than a generation, for more than 30 years. But what's actually been happening is that the chemical companies, like Monsanto, have continued to produce these toxic herbicides and pesticides and chemicals. So now Dow Chemical, who was also one of the manufacturers of Agent Orange along with Monsanto during the Vietnam War, Dow Chemical has a new product that they want approved by the USDA. It's herbicide-resistant, genetically modified corn that you can put endless amounts of 2,4-D on. 2,4-D is one of the most dangerous herbicides even for farmers. And what's coming out now is that farmers who grow things like tomatoes, you know, any type of farmer who isn't growing something genetically engineered designed to withstand 2,4-D is going to have their crops severely damaged by this. 2,4-D is sprayed aerially and it can easily drift. And 2,4-D is going to end up over all of our food, not just the crops that are designed to resist it. But if we start using genetically engineered crops that are resistant to 2,4-D use is going to increase 50 times. We're going to have 50 times more 2,4-D, and that means 50 times more dioxin pollution from 2,4-D. And 2,4-D is already the 7th largest source of dioxin pollution in the United States, according to the FDA.
Gandhi has a list of sins. One of them is science without humanity. If any company epitomizes that, it is Monsanto's. This is the company that has brought us Agent Orange, DDT, dioxins, PCBs, bovine growth hormones, GMO foods. And if there's one thing that epitomizes it for me, it's a suicide seed. They developed a seed that's designed to go sterile after 1 year. They want to change the way farmers have been farming for the entirety of civilization. They plant their crops, they grow their crops, they harvest their crops, and they save the seeds for the following year. Well, that's not profitable enough for Monsanto's. They want you going back year after year after year, essentially being their slave, having to buy your product from them every single year. And unfortunately, they give the promise of bigger yields in smaller areas. That's not true. You can ask 250,000 farmers in India about that. They were forced to grow Monsanto products. They didn't give the yields that they had promised. These farmers lost their livelihoods and had no money to buy more seeds from Monsanto's, which they were now obligated to do. Over 200,000 farmers in India committed suicide because they had absolutely nothing left. How did they commit suicide? By drinking Roundup, another Monsanto product. People think Roundup is a wonderful thing. It's not. It depletes the soil, causes root rot, and now insects and weeds are becoming resistant to it. We now have super weeds. So all this wonderful technology that Monsanto's is bringing to the world is backfiring, and it is destroying our planet. There's a big difference between feeding the world and controlling the world's food supply. Monsanto's is working towards the latter. They must be stopped. You have people that will work for Monsanto's, do research, and say, okay, our research says this is perfectly safe. Well, that probably wouldn't fly by the FDA. So what they do is have people leave Monsanto's and then go work for the FDA, approving their own research. That's like kids grading their own tests. Of course they're all going to get A's. They say justice is blind. Justice is not blind. Justice has 20/20 vision. If you're an oligarch, if you have ungodly amounts of wealth, you're above the law. We've seen it in our financial industry. We see it in Monsanto's, and that has got to change.
How do you feel about Barack Obama putting Michael Taylor in the FDA after being vice president or head attorney at Monsanto?
Well, it's the same as people working for Goldman Sachs getting on his administration. It's absolutely corrupt. It's hypocritical. It does not work for the best interests of the people. And unfortunately, we are no longer living in a representative government. We're here in our nation's capital where they have a saying, taxation without representation. But that doesn't just apply to D.C. That applies to an entire country because the people of this country are no longer represented. The only people that are represented are the ungodly wealthy and these multinational corporations that can push through basically any legislation they want and do anything they want to the vast majority of our population. They are destroying our country, they are destroying our planet, they are killing our children for money. My God, how much is enough?
The protest back!
Groups of patriots forming strong community bonds and standing up for constitutional rights of all citizens, including the poor and downtrodden. Will Americans watching from the sidelines join in time? May Day may provide an answer to that question.
But I'm hoping that we can all keep meeting up in the middle because it's working. It is working, whether it's going to bring a good result soon or not, it's working.
A referee in a sports game blows a whistle on foul or illegal play. Hence, employees who expose wrongdoing in private or government enterprise have been called whistleblowers since the early 1970s. Their actions protected by federal and state statutes since the time of the U.S. Civil War.
What a tribute to receive the Rittenhour Truth-Telling Prize as a whistleblower.
These statutes have not, however, much impeded government prosecution of and corporate retaliation against whistleblowers and the journalists who report their disclosures to the public. Occupy Wall Street arose, in large part, because of reporting by WikiLeaks and accused whistleblower Bradley Manning. Legislation abridging First Amendment rights of free speech and peaceable assembly has been enacted since OWS began, and the government has also attacked freedom of the press. The Obama administration has prosecuted several whistleblowers under the Espionage Act, one of the most serious charges that can be leveled against an American. Journalists have been targeted along with whistleblowers on an unprecedented scale. None of this is new. Daniel Ellsberg is a well-known whistleblower who compiled and released the Pentagon Papers and exposed the lies of 3 American administrations to the public about the Vietnam War. Ellsberg was prosecuted under the Espionage Act, but charges were eventually dismissed due to gross government misconduct and illegal evidence gathering. Protections of Americans all, but negated by the Patriot Act and other legislation passed since 9/11. Ellsberg has continued as an activist to this day and is a highly visible supporter of Bradley Manning.
She's a people's martyr and a union martyr.
Karen Silkwood was not as fortunate. Silkwood worked for Kerr McGee, an Oklahoma plant where plutonium pellets for nuclear fuel rods were produced. In 1974, Silkwood became active in a union, discovered major health and safety violations, and testified to the Atomic Energy Commission. She was deliberately contaminated with plutonium by unknowns, decided to go public with documentation of shoddy nuclear industry practices, and was killed in a mysterious auto accident on her way to meet a New York Times reporter. Government and corporate prosecution and prosecution of whistleblowers and the journalists who aid them has continued over the decades since Silkwood's death. Career federal employees such as Thomas Drake and John Kiriakou exposed warrantless surveillance and torture by the Bush administration. Yet both men have been prosecuted with vigor by the Obama Department of Justice, with special effort made against involved journalists. These loyal servants to the American public are by no means alone, as the American state apparently seeks to negate all aspects of the First Amendment. At least the government pays lip service to the rules of justice. Corporations may play a little dirtier. In the 2 years since the Gulf of Mexico BP oil disaster, at least 10 experts, whistleblowers, and insiders have died under mysterious circumstances, and 3 others have been imprisoned, disappeared, or survived attempted assassination. Whistleblowers are the referees of our systems of governance and business, high-stake games indeed. Consider this. What would we do without them?